different story. During the time Hunter Biden had this gun, Naomi Biden is trying to meet up with him in New York City and is unable to reach him. And at one point, she tells her father she's really sad. She can't handle this. She just misses him and wants to hang out with him. And prosecutors use those communications to establish that, in fact, this was actually not great. His own daughter could not reach him when they were in the same city.
So the defense's theoretically best witness to this idea that he was not a drug addict at this time, that he might have even been sober or on his way to being sober, ends up being someone who essentially confirms the prosecution's claims that Hunter Biden is still not okay during this period.
Right. So by the time Naomi Biden leaves the stand, walks across the room, and wraps her dad in a hug for about a minute, it becomes clear that this testimony and this cross-examination especially did not go the way Hunter Biden and his team hoped it would have.
And of course we know that this defense strategy didn't work because we now know the guilty verdict. It seems clear that this jury ultimately looks at all this evidence and says that while perhaps they didn't have a time-stamped photograph of Hunter Biden, using drugs or being high on drugs the day that he bought this gun, it very much seems from the testimony that the jury believed the prosecution's portrayal of him as someone very much in the throes of drug addiction at the time that he bought that gun.
Right. And in the end, jurors took only 3 hours to return a guilty verdict.
Right. So let's turn to the reaction to this verdict, starting with Hunter Biden's father, President Joe Biden.
Right. So minutes after the verdict is announced and the First Lady walks out of the courthouse holding Hunter Biden's hand, the president releases a statement reiterating his support for his son, how proud he is of what he called seeing someone you love come out of the other side of an addiction like this. But also he says he is going to accept the outcome of the trial. Last week he was asked if he would pardon Hunter Biden, and President Biden said no. So to me, that's drawing a clear line of being a supportive father who backs his son no matter what, and a president who is not going to overreach and pardon someone who was just convicted in a court of law.
Right, and that simultaneously seemed to be President Biden drawing a contrast with former President Trump.
Right, so in an election that has been all about drawing a character contrast with Donald Trump, the statement itself strikes a contrast with Donald Trump, who has railed against the outcome of his own trial, has essentially lashed out at every aspect of this legal process. President Biden, by contrast, has quietly accepted the outcome and continued to say that he will keep embracing his son.
Since you raised the question of this conviction and the election, I think is going to be on many people's minds. How does the conviction of the incumbent president's son on gun charges potentially impact the course of this election?
Well, at the very least, the conviction of the president's son shows that there were consequences in a legal trial that had some serious weight to them. All along, Republicans have alleged that, the Biden-led Justice Department was going to let the president's son off easy. So the fact that Hunter Biden was convicted takes some of the steam out of the Republican argument that he would get some sort of sweetheart deal or be treated more favorably than Donald Trump would have been during his own hush money trial. That said, Republicans will use this, and Donald Trump will use this to bolster this idea that the Bidens are a crime family, that corruption runs through the family. And in fact, Hunter Biden is going to stand trial later this summer on tax evasion charges. And Republicans are certainly hoping to, in the heat of a campaign season, attack the Bidens again on the grounds that the Bidens can't be trusted, essentially. I would expect to hear more of that in a drumbeat as this campaign goes on.
Katie, I'm curious, in a country that's ravaged by a drug epidemic, is it possible that this conviction and watching Joe Biden reach out to his son and his family go through what it's gone through might not just be something that doesn't hurt Biden, and this admittedly gets kind of complicated and cynical when it comes to politics, but potentially makes Biden more relatable to some voters, and in some sense is a political virtue?
I think there's a lot of truth to that, and Americans have showed in polls that what they see of Joe Biden is a father supporting his son. And that's not a political calculation on Joe Biden's part. I think if you know anything about the president and his relationship with his kids, it was forged out of great tragedy at the beginning of President Biden's career, and they're extremely close because of that, and they're incredibly loyal to each other because of that. And you just see that play out through the presidency. You're seeing it play out today. The president rearranged his schedule really quickly after the verdict to go fly home to Wilmington to see his son, met Hunter Biden on the tarmac and gave him a hug. So there is that cynical part of you that thinks this is a play for sympathy or a play for Americans to see this family in a different way. But also, several of those jurors had family members who suffer from addiction. Most Americans know somebody or are related to someone who suffers from this. It's an incredibly universal problem that Americans deal with, and for the President of the United States to be dealing with the fallout of that is relatable.
Katie, I think it makes sense to end this conversation where we began, which is grappling with the fact of these two criminal convictions, not just of Hunter Biden, but of Hunter Biden and Donald Trump. When Hunter Biden was convicted, it struck me, at least, that if we're being really honest with ourselves, both Donald Trump and Hunter Biden would probably never have been put on trial for these particular charges, a gun charge, in the case of Hunter Biden, a hush money payment, in the case of Donald Trump, had they not been president or been the president's son, right? That just feels like an objective reality. Trump came into the crosshairs of a Democratic district attorney. Hunter Biden came into the crosshairs of a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney.
Right.
And so what does all of this say about the way that our legal system is now interacting with our political system?
Well, essentially, we've entered an era where politicians are trying to use the legal system to their benefit, and where the courts are going to feel more pressure to carry out their wishes. And, to be clear, that doesn't mean all of these cases are without merit or are going to be without merit, but they're now going to be carried out in this environment where politics at the very least will be the backdrop, or at the most will be a major factor. So to me, it's looking a bit like it's the price of admission to presidential politics. And as we're seeing with future cases against Hunter Biden and Donald Trump, this is clearly a phenomenon Americans are going to have to keep grappling with.
Right, their politicians and even their politicians' children on trial.
Exactly.
Well, Katie, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hunter Biden is likely to be sentenced in the next few months. He faces up to 25 years in prison, but because he is a first-time non-violent offender, the judge in the case may choose a more lenient punishment. We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported by State Street Global Advisors.
Electricity, a big idea that's inspired countless new ones. From powering the light bulb to virtually powering our entire lives. 30 years ago, State Street launched the Spider S&P 500 ETF, SPY, a big idea that inspired the world.
assets are subject to risk, including possible loss of principal. Most distributors ink distribute.
Here's what else you need to know today. In secret recordings made last week, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito told a woman posing as a conservative Catholic that compromise in America between the left and the right might be impossible.
One side or the other is going to win, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised. It's not like we're going to split the difference.
At another point, Alito told the woman, who in real life is a liberal activist, that he agreed with her claim that the United States must return to a place of godliness.
People in this country who believe in God have got to keep fighting for that, to return our country to a place of godliness.
Oh, I agree with you.
The unguarded remarks made at an annual dinner attended by Supreme Court justices reinforces Alito's reputation as a committed social conservative, intent on safeguarding the place of Christianity in American life. And they are likely to intensify questions about Alito's impartiality. Alito is already under fire for allowing 2 flags associated with the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol to fly over his homes at various times following the 2020 election. Today's episode was produced by Shannon Lynn, Stella Tan, and Will Reed. It was edited by Devin Taylor, contains original music by Dan Powell, Marian Lozano, and Alicia Baitu, and was engineered by Alyssa Moxley. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Lansford of Wonderly. That
For much of human history, people have used plants to treat ailments. The poisonous effects of vegetation can be curative depending on the dosage. A new exhibit at the Lloyd Library called Pick Your Poison explores the healing power of plants, with naturalist Carol Mundy giving a sold-out talk later this month about the medicinal properties of native plants. On our gardening show today, we're going to talk about medicinal botany and the healing power you can find in your own backyard. And of course, our experts are here to answer gardening questions of all kinds. Joining me now, our naturalist at the Crow Nose, Carol Mundy. Thanks for being here, Carol.
Glad to be here. Happy to help.
Campbell County Extension Office Horticulture Agent, Sarah Inbus. Welcome back, Sarah.
So good to be here.
And Brick Gardens founder, Dominique Peebles. Thanks for being here, Dominique.
Hey, Lucy, thanks for having me.
We know you have questions for our experts, so give us a call at 513-419-7100, or you can email talk@wbxu.org. Carol, as I mentioned, people have been using plants for medicinal purposes for thousands of years. What are some of the most common plants we can find in our own backyards and our gardens that we can use as medicine?
Well, I have to remind people that the information I'm giving out, I'm not a doctor. I'm just telling you the way that they have been used. I'm not telling you to run out and do this on your own. You really need to do your homework. It's not something to take lightly. But there are so many plants. Every plant on the planet has some medicinal use. It's just a matter of finding out how and who used it. And so some of the most common things, most folks would certainly know aspirin. And aspirin is a derivative that comes from the chemicals that was in things like willow, but another wonderful native plant called Queen of the Prairie in the United States, and in Europe it's called Queen of the Meadow. And so in the talk we'll talk about that interesting journey on how to find that, but that's one of those kinds of things. But something as simple as the common plantain that grows in your yard that you might be cursing has been used to help ease a bruise, a wound, a bee sting. And so it's right there. You might be calling it a weed, you mow it over, and yet all those things under your feet have some other value.
Interesting. And some of those remedies use plants that can be poisonous.
Correct.
Tell us about that.
And that's one of those interesting things. If you think about poison and medicine, there's a very fine line between what works and what makes the lights go out forever. So, just getting that fine amount. And doctors, researchers, medical research are doing that now to be able to tease out very specific compounds of drugs, of flowers, of botanically cultivated compounds that are now being teased out for drugs in cancer use because they have very specific targets. So it's one of those kinds of things of knowing that and the testing. It's not like somebody just went out willy-nilly and said, here, try this, let's see if it cures whatever. There was a saying, I'm sure you may have heard this before in terms of mushroom hunters. There's old mushroom hunters and there's bold mushroom hunters, but there's no bold mushroom hunters. So it does involve a lot of research, doing your homework, and not taking it casually.
And where can people find reliable, correct information about medicinal botany? Because it sounds like there are ways to really do it wrong.
There are many ways to do it wrong, and I would say number one, Cincinnati has one of the finest libraries and museums. The Lloyd Library and Museum has such an excellent collection, and so many of what they have is now been digitized, but when you go to their website, you can also have access to the medical, pharmacological botanics that have been used throughout history, because you can tie into that from all over the world. And now you can be doing the research. Again, not everything you read on the internet is true, so make sure you start with a good, justified, vetted resource. But the Lloyd is right here, and we need to use it more often. That's one of the first places that I start.
How many of you mentioned the scientific studies and how some of these plants are being looked at for cancer treatments and things like that. How many of these remedies that have been used for centuries have had modern scientific studies to kind of prove their claims? I mean, I know there's, modern medicine obviously has developed drugs like aspirin from a lot of these plants, but then there are plants like echinacea that some people swear, I take this every cold and flu season.
And it works for me.
Does it work for you?
Well,
but there are scientific studies.
But they will say it works for me, and yet if you talk to the scientists, they may say doing those double-blind studies that they're not seeing, that maybe it's the placebo effect.
Right.
It's kind of like if I'm not feeling good and I have a hot toddy. Look at what goes into a hot toddy. I usually feel a little better. Is it really the botanicals from, you know, the honey and whatever lemon and botanically alcohol that I might put in there? Or is it just the fact that it's the ritual of heating that up and having that warm and it feels good on my throat? So some of that is the placebo effect for sure. But at any given time, the pharmaceuticals that are out there are more than 40% plant-based. That's where they start.
Okay. Yeah, I tried echinacea when my father-in-law, my late father-in-law, insisted, oh, I love it, it works for me, and it just gave me daisy burps. I didn't feel like it did much for me
It did,
from
yeah.
a medical standpoint. Carol, if somebody wanted to start a medicinal garden, what would you recommend?
Again, first do your homework and consider which direction you want this to go. Are you looking at it from a historic point of view? There are places that you can go and visit that have historic gardens that will show you plants that have been used that way. Our own governor's mansion here in the state of Ohio, the Heritage Gardens there at the governor's mansion in Bexley, has the Lloyd Medicinal Garden. And you could make a trip up there. You have to make an appointment, but you could go and see what they're utilizing there, and then look at the research that they have put together. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of places that you can go and questions to ask to find out about these. And then the next thing would be, will those plants grow here? That's always the biggest thing, because you may have some wild, wonderful, what you think of as the curative, but it may not grow here in southern Ohio.
on stage to defend his title. Major League Eating, which helps run the event, said Tuesday that Chestnut isn't eligible. That's because he signed an endorsement deal with Impossible Foods, which hopes to win over meat lovers with its plant-based products.
He peaked in 2021. I was there. It was amazing. 76 hot dogs and buns. That is going to be really, really difficult to top. And it's possible that he might be like, I'm going to cut my losses and start my own thing.
Loftus says that doesn't mean this year's spectacle isn't worth watching.
I would be curious how they're going to almost, uncontestedly turn Joey into a vegan villain.
Chestnut said on social media that he was gutted to learn of his ban, but promised fans they'll see him eat again soon. Whether that happens on Coney Island is unclear, but Major League Eating says it will welcome him back if he decides to change course. Rachel Treisman, NPR News.
This is 91.7 WVXU. Our feature, OK, I Want to Know, is your chance to ask that question that seems to have no answer. This week, we look at an important part of Cincinnati's skyline. Todd Osborne of Loveland has been wondering about the top of one of downtown's landmarks.
I would like to know what exactly is on top of the PNC Tower. The little structure on top of the entire building. What exactly is that? I used to work at Channel 48, and I would videotape from Peru Tower and from across the river, and would always use that as a focal point to zoom in and out of. What is it?
Greg Hand, who runs the Cincinnati Curiosities blog, says the name of the building in question depends on who you ask.
The Fourth and Vine Tower, previously the Central Trust Tower, or the PNC Bank Tower, or the Union Central Tower. You can kind of date Cincinnatians by what they call that building.
And says it opened in 1913 as the Union Central Tower, and it wasn't the city's first high-rise. That honor belongs to the Ingalls Building, which is now a Courtyard by Marriott right across the street. It was erected 10 years before the Fourth and Vine Tower.
The Ingalls Building was so revolutionary when it was constructed that one of the newspapers assigned a reporter overnight to watch it because they were convinced it was going to fall down.
Hand says the Fourth and Vine Tower was the one that put Cincinnati on the map as a major metropolitan city. He says the owner went to New York to find an architect by the name of Cass Gilbert.
Cass was a very accomplished architect. One of his major commissions was the United States Supreme Court building. And he was brought up in the firm of McKim, Mead, and White, an extremely influential New York City firm that trained its architects in classical structures.
And says classical structures include St. Mark's Campanile in Venice, which he says shares some traits with the Fourth and Vine Tower.
It's structured very much like a classical column with a base and a shaft and a capital. And the Campanile in Venice actually has like this little structure at the top, and then it goes to a pyramid, and then a bronze statue sitting on top of it.
And says the Greek columns near the top of the Fourth and Vine Tower are inspired by one of the seven wonders of the ancient world.
The tomb of King Mausolus in Halicarnassus in western Turkey. That building was so well known. King Mausolus's name continues today in the term mausoleum.
You can find similar elements in the Civil Courts building in St. Louis, the War Memorial in Indianapolis, and the Masonic House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. Hand says the Cincinnati structure was originally the home of an insurance company.
The Union Central Bank Company was started in the 1860s by the Methodist Church. And so in addition to this very Grecian, very classical sort of structure, if you look down toward the base, there's a lot of Christian iconography that's built into this. So you will find representations of pelicans.
Pelicans were a common Christian symbol during the Middle Ages. Now that's all interesting and good to know, but it doesn't answer the question. What is on the very top of Fourth and Vine, sitting at the pinnacle of the pyramid roof? It's a squarish bronze temple-like structure. If you look closely, you'll see it, too, has columns. But if you ever looked down on it, say when the tower observation deck was open, you may have seen a big round hole in the middle of those columns. So enough stalling. What is it?
It's a decorative cover for a very large smokestack. This was a building built in 1913, so you're going to be heating the building, you're going to be heating the water with coal. So you're going to have a very large coal furnace in the lower levels of this building, and the smokestack just goes right up through the center of the building and out through that temple.
You can see photos of the mausoleum-style columns, the pelicans, and the chimney cover. And you can ask your own questions at WVXU.org. Bill Reinhardt, 91.7 WVXU.
Support comes from Sunspot Cooling Patio, featuring fine outdoor casual furniture from manufacturers like Brown Jordan, Homecrest, Telescope, and Woodard. With over 300 groupings in stock and over 55 years of experience, Sunspot Cooling Patio can help you create your own unique outdoor environment. Located at I-75 and Galbraith Road or sunspotcoolingpatio.com.
Support comes from the James at Ohio State, where the best outcomes for treating cancer come from early detection and a clear diagnosis. The James Cancer Diagnostic Center is designed to provide rapid evaluation and a clear diagnosis to those who suspect they have cancer. When it might be cancer, visit cancer.osu.edu/diagnostic center. Support comes from Cincinnati World Cinema, presenting the Sundance Short Film Festival. Comedy, drama, and animation on 2 weekends. June 14th, 15th, 16th, and June 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, exclusively at the Garfield Theater. Info at cincyworldcinema.org.
This traffic report supported by Unbound.org. Wreck on the ramp from westbound 275 to northbound 71. Westbound 275 after Mosteller, there's a wreck in the right lane, and southbound Shepherd, a wreck in the left lane. A low of 57 tonight, a high of 89 tomorrow. It's 84 degrees now.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Keller.
And I'm Elsa Chang. 2 decades ago, author Porchista Huckford was a Beverly Hills shopper. And there were times a certain kind of customer would walk into her store, a wealthy Iranian who may have shared her blood and culture, but who inhabited a totally different world from her own.
They were the most impeccably dressed people you could imagine. I mean, all black, gold. Armani seemed to be the favorite. I mean, I would know the minute they walked in that they were one of my people. Yeah. And so not one of my people.
These people are now the main characters of her new novel called Tehrangeles. It zeroes in on an Iranian-American family whose massive wealth springs from a snack food empire. They're poised to star in a reality TV show, which is understandable given that they're one of the very richest families in California and a total hot mess. And somehow the narcissism, materialism, and phobias of these 4 daughters and their parents offer us a moving version of the Iranian-American story. Porchista Huckford joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let me ask you, when you were working at that store on Rodeo Drive, like, how much resentment versus envy did you feel for these obscenely wealthy Iranian customers who would walk in?
Well, first of all, I wasn't allowed to express anything in that store. We were Rodeo Drive shop girls, so we had to be very, we were wearing all black, very pleasant, almost scripted, but I would always initiate the conversation with these Iranians because I always had this bit of sort of naive hope that maybe we could have a nice conversation. I'd always be excited to see Iranian Americans, so I would often, introduce myself or say, which is Persian for, excuse me, do you speak Farsi, do you speak Persian? And their reaction was often where things would go wrong.
What do you mean?
Because they were not very happy to realize that I was Iranian. I mean, they were used to Iranians on one side of the counter and I was on the wrong side of the counter.
I see. This feeling that you're describing, like, I'm not like those Iranians, you write that feeling, actually, into one of the sisters in this novel, Roxana, who literally tells people she is Italian, not Iranian. Like, she's the influencer, probably the messiest hot mess of all of them. What was Roxana trying to avoid, you think,